Yep.
Good morning, Anna. Welcome to my podcast, One for the Road. And the roles are reversed here because I've been on your podcast twice now, haven't I? And it's
Twice,
yeah,
yes.
and I think it's amazing work what you do, and we can go and talk about that later on. But how are you today?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. I'm good, Dave. It's a Friday, so we're recording this on a Friday, and that's always a nice end to the week. I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you for having me on. As I said, you've said you were on mine twice, so I'm playing catch up. But no,
Yeah,
that's good. It's good to
yeah.
see you, and it's good to be here.
Good. So, as you know, this is slightly different from yours. These are life stories. And
Mm.
to be totally frank, I don't know that much about yours, but this is why I love doing what I do because I get to find out right here, right now. And it's like we're having a coffee in a nice, lovely little shop somewhere. We've got a couple of croissants to eat and a coffee, and we're all relaxed and chilled. And you can tell me all about it.
Oh, sounds good. Sounds good. Yeah, okay. So I am Amana, as you know. I live in Gloucestershire. I'm 53 years of age, mother of two, lovely husbands. And I have been sober for coming up to 4 years.
Oh,
Um, Thank you. Thank you. Best thing I've ever done. Obviously, you hear that from a lot of guests. It was off the back of a pretty torrid kind of couple of decades, if I'm honest. So I guess this is what you want me to unpack a little bit, those decades
yeah,
and
I mean, I normally even start with people's growing up, quite often people say, "Do you know what? I had a really good upbringing, and I don't know where it
mm.
all started from." So let's cover that first and see what that was like for you.
Okay, well, I had a pretty good upbringing, and I
There you
don't know where it
go.
all started from.
We'll end it there then.
The end. No, so yeah, I did have a pretty good upbringing. Um, I was sort of raised by my mum and my dad, who absolutely and sort of invested a lot of time and energy and also money, if I'm honest, in sort of my education. Um, I didn't really want for anything when I was growing up. I honestly, I sort of, when you sort of go through the sober progress, the journey,
Mm,
and you look back, you unpick your background, and you want to go, where did it all go wrong? Who can I blame? What different choices could I have made, and all that sort of stuff. And actually, there was very, very little in my actual sort of growing up years, youthful years, that I can point to as being anything other than pretty privileged and unfortunate, to be honest. I think my teenage years were challenging. My mother would definitely tell you my teenage years were challenging. My parents got divorced when I was 16, and it was a tricky old time. I was very angry with my father for the considerable part that he played in that divorce, um, affairs, etc. And at the same time, my brother, who I'm very close to, was sort of moving out of home. He was off up to university, 2 years older than me. So that's where he went, age 18, and I was left at home with my lovely mum. But it was suddenly it went from being the sort of the four of us to the two of us in a very short space of time, and the circumstances were ugly, and deeply sort of saddening, really. So I definitely identify with that sort of period as being tricky.
mm,
Uh, wallop that on top of the teenage brain,
mm.
and you've probably got a sort of a bit of a shit show of emotions going on. Um, I had already had my first drink by then, but I think it's probably when I was probably more inclined to think, that's quite a pleasurable thing to be doing. It certainly probably helped me numb out and sort of forget some of the woes at home. Um, so that was probably, that was possibly quite impactful.
What did
And
that
then
drink look like for you? Was it out sociably or? or what was that first drink? Do you remember?
Yeah, I do. I had a boyfriend when I was about 15 years of age. He was a year or so older than me. Didn't live too far away. We'd spend time at each other's houses. And I did that typical teenage thing, probably of raiding his parents' drinks cabinet full of horrible sticky stuff left
Yeah.
over from holidays and whatnot. And definitely experimenting with, the sort of spirits from different countries and stuff that was there. But I took that quite quickly into drinking things like cider. Is it Thunderball? Am I remembering that correctly? The kind of fortified wines and stuff like that. And but by the time I was sort of 16 years of age, I was, happily sneaking out of school at lunchtime and drinking in the local park. I would have got into a lot of trouble had
Mm.
my private school known that I was doing that in their uniform, not far from the school gates. But that was what myself and a couple of rebellious friends used to probably do.
And
And
what, you was going back to school after that, or was just bunking off in the afternoon?
yeah, well, occasionally it would be a sort of a lunchtime thing, and then we would go back into school.
Oh my God.
I know, don't, I know, don't. I think about it now, and I'm just like, what was I doing? Much more frequently, though, it would have been, yeah, going around to my boyfriend's house in the evening, or when I was beginning to get away with looking a bit older and going into pubs. 16 years of age, I was drinking, or even saying to my parents that I was going to sort of a friend's house, and instead sort of going to an off license and going somewhere and drinking, with or without them, actually. So I think it kind of escalated quite quickly, but certainly by the time I went to university, I was in a pattern.
Yeah.
I was a drinker, definitely,
Yeah.
by the time I went to university. I mean, a lot of people say that that's where things really kind of form and sort of ramp up for them, but I was well on my way.
Student union bars and silly prices, and first year of doing pretty much. I mean, I didn't,
Yeah.
I didn't go to uni. Like, I literally was out working at 15 years old. I was old school.
Mhm.
You
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I went to Brighton, and Brighton was a great place to be at university. It had a really sort of vibrant nightlife, as you would know, and it has, because I know you know Eastbourne. I know your stories
Yeah,
around
it's only
Eastbourne.
too well.
Yeah, so it was definitely a sort of the independence and the freedom of university as well. Obviously sort of meant that drinking could happen both in this sort of shared house or the halls of residence I was in the first couple of years, but also, we would happily buy alcohol and go down onto the beach, um, and party and drink. And yeah, it was a defining part of my university as well. That and, smoking dope and, things like that. It was just, I guess I was doing other things as well at that time to sort of numb out, I think, really. But I think because of my drinking before I even went to university, it was just already well established. Um, I liked the feeling. There's no doubt about that. And it helped me. I wasn't thinking about it consciously in this way at the time, but it was definitely a sort of a numbing tool. I was using it for like emotional management at quite a young age.
Emotional management. I like the way you frame that. Yeah. And that, but at the time, we don't really know, do we? We're just going along with it. And it's like, this is what we do at this age, and everyone else is doing it as well.
Yeah, well, absolutely, because it's one of those. I wasn't doing it on my own. I had very happy sort of partners in crime. I shared a house, and cohorts of people on the same course as me who would happily, come along, do the same thing, house parties, going out, student evenings, Thursday nights, pubs around Brighton. It was what we were all doing.
Mm.
And, you know, I look back now and I'm thinking, well, yes, of course, the signs were there that I was carving a certain path and setting myself on a certain trajectory. But There is absolutely no doubt that at the time I would not have recognized that to be the case. I was just enjoying my university years, having a lot of fun, um, and doing what everybody else was doing. I mean, obviously there were more nerdy people actually doing some studying somewhere. Somewhere in Brighton, but
but
not
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 many.
not in my group, not many, and not in my group. So I didn't really stand out for being exceptional in that regard.
Yeah. So when
Um,
you finished uni, you obviously qualified, right, by the skin of your teeth,
yes, a
maybe.
few, yeah, just about. I did all right. I did
Yeah,
okay.
good, good.
Um, and that's I think possibly been a constant thing with me, Dave. I've always done okay, you know. So again, there were no big flags being waved to other people that I was on some kind of crash and burn pathway, because I was doing what I needed to do at each kind of twist and turn to get to the next stage. And in fact, I was pretty good in my third year at university. I had to do a placement in industry, and I went to work for Rover, as it was in Birmingham at the time, obviously the car company, and I was brilliant. They sponsored me. I did a project for them. They said, "We like you, and would you come back and work for us when you finished?" So they sponsored my fourth year, which was great money. Um, and I therefore didn't have an awful lot of pressure around my finals. I was going back to work at Rover, and that's what I did. A sort of slightly hairy-assed manufacturing environment,
Yeah, yeah,
which I loved. I absolutely loved, but quite a hard drinking environment. Um, I went in as a graduate. We did placements around the whole kind of gamut of different disciplines and departments around the company. But I went into manufacturing. Um, I worked on the track for 6 months, which was brilliant. I worked shifts. We had to get our hands dirty and do all the stuff that happens within the car factory. We had to do everything. And my time on the track was both brilliant, but also, again, looking back, very, very boozy.
yeah,
I mean, listen to me. I sound like I come from the home counties, even though I don't. I'm obviously a woman. Back in the day, there were not that many slightly posh sounding birds who worked on the manufacturing track in Longbridge and Birmingham. So, my need, or my sort of sense of assimilating into that environment, probably came at the end of shifts or early closures on Friday, when everybody would pour into the pubs around that part of Birmingham and just drink for the rest of the day.
yeah.
And I was very happy in that environment.
You was already
Very,
established as a drinker there, so you was
yeah.
probably not like a lightweight, flimsy, like you was one of the boys, probably. Do you know what I mean?
I was one of the lads, and I was probably a little bit of a curiosity in that sense, but also they were very kind of, it's funny, almost proud and quite protective of me.
Yeah,
Um, and even when I stopped working on the track and then went into kind of management positions around the company, I'd already established myself as being kind of very relatable with the people who still worked on the track, and people who worked for me. So it was very much part of who I was and who I wanted to come across as, to be honest.
yeah, yeah,
I wanted that. Um, but it's interesting, isn't it? Because as I look back now, um, we drink for different stages during our lives. I mentioned sort of emotional management. I mean, one of the strongest emotions that we have is this need or desire to sort of fit in, and belong. And that's very much one of the jobs I gave alcohol to do when I was working, in my first job. I think it applies to lots of people who leave university, or even, haven't been to university. Lots of people who go into, their first sort of working role, and they're looking for acceptance. They're looking for
yeah,
belonging.
yeah.
Uh,
This is why it's hard
Definitely.
for people, isn't it? When they don't drink, it's like, the Friday lunchtime, oh, we're all going to the pub because it's Simon's birthday or something. It's like, you come in, or no. It's still hard even now, even though this AF movement is growing and it's getting bigger and bigger. There are so many stigmas around it still. And we can talk about that later. So you were in your what, mid-20s by now, were you?
Yeah, early 20s. I stayed at Rover until I suppose until my sort of late-ish 20s.
Yeah,
I was there for about 6 or 7 years.
yeah.
Absolutely stonkingly great times. Honestly,
Brilliant.
I mean I mean I had a wonderful sort of start to my working career, but sort of what happened during that period of time is I was attending some workshop or some training internally, and someone who worked in the marketing department said to me, "Oi, you, we think you'd be really good in our, market research department." And I was like, "Ooh, I'm being picked, I'm being plucked, I'm being chosen to come and, work elsewhere." So I followed and I did that, and it took me into a sort of a world of marketing, brand management, which I really enjoyed. It took me away from the sort of manufacturing side of things, but put me into a world of sort of traveling up and down to London, visiting the ad agencies, being sort of taken out and about hospitality and stuff by the ad agencies because I was responsible for the communications around Mini and MG. And our ad agencies would sort of fall over themselves on the day that I was going down to London to sort of take me out for lunch and, butter me up, as it were.
Yeah.
So I entered that whole world of, ooh, this is what long, lazy lunches look like, and sort
Ah,
of hospitality and being treated to, big blowout lunches in London. I like this. I
yeah,
like it a lot. So that was me sort of dipping my feet in or my toes into that sort of sea. And then lo and behold, about late 20s when I decided I'd had a breakup with a boyfriend. I was living in Warwick at the time, and Warwick's beautiful, but it's small.
yeah,
I thought this town ain't big enough for the two of us. I need to move away. We had too many friends in common and too many things going on there.
yeah,
So I decided to go ad agency direction myself, and I moved down to London and started what I would call the sort of the peak of my boozy career, working in ad agencies for the next 15 years. Um, yeah, 12, 15 years. So that was it. I mean, it was literally the pull towards that, which because it had been the sort of the part of my job I'd really, really enjoyed. And it gave me lots of opportunity to drink, which was also very much part of that magnetic, come to London, join an ad agency. Um, so that's what I did. And I worked in the ad age. I mean, I've literally just stopped about 5 or 6 months ago working in ad agencies. But that's where I spent the greatest part of my career, falling in and out of bars around Soho. Um, I was single for quite a long time when I moved to London, and I would do all of my socializing straight after work. I mean, obviously, a lot of people in London do. They tend to like leave the offices, leave their place of work, do their socializing, have their food kind of close to where they work, and then go home. Um, so I was doing exactly that, probably between about 5:30, 6 o'clock, and 9 o'clock every night, pretty much every night. Um, Again, looking back, it felt normal, but it was heavy. It was a heavy drinking lifestyle,
yeah.
and it's clearly yet more cemented that into my kind of my pattern and my psyche. It was preferable to probably going home and being on my own in the flat.
Did you get to the stage where you would nip in Tesco's and get a bottle of wine, or was it all sociable drinking?
Oh no, I would nip into Tesco's and get a bottle of wine.
Yeah,
Definitely.
so
I
you'd
would
have your 3 hours out with all your colleagues and that, and then get your meal for one microwave. Well, maybe not, but that quite often you see that the bottle of Chardonnay and a microwave meal on the way home at 9 o'clock. Do you know what I mean? When you're waiting
Oh
in
yeah.
the queue.
Yeah. No, I would definitely I would get on the tube, and there was, yeah, definitely there was a sort of both a service station and also a kind of like, whether it's Sainsbury's, Tesco's, Metro's type thing on the way between my tube stop and my house. And I would definitely be popping in there just in case, just in case when I get home, I just
Might want
cheeky,
one.
cheeky,
Okay?
cheeky little drink. Might want one. Of course I would have it. And then
Yeah.
yeah, fall into bed, get up and repeat the whole exercise about 5 days a week. If
And was it that
anything,
work hard, play hard attitude then? You know, advertising's probably quite competitive and, you know, you're all like trying to meet targets and stuff. So was it like wake up in the morning and think, I don't know how I'm going to get through the day? Or was it like, because the reason I say that is for me, it got to a stage that I didn't know any real difference. That's how I woke
mm,
up and I
mm,
just got on with it. It wasn't like the random hangover and it's like, oh my God, what have I done? I've got a busy day. It was, okay, I've got a busy day, knowing how terrible I felt every day.
I honestly can't put my hand on my heart and say at that point in my life, I thought that my job was particularly stressful. I wasn't chasing targets or anything like that. I wasn't in the sort of the sales side of advertising. I was more on the creative side of things.
Right.
And for me, it was just, I, it was just baked into what was part of an industry culture, quite a young cohort of people working in advertising agencies. Um, Lots of sort of I think, associations between that type of business, quite a fluid way of working. It's not a corporate 9 to 5. If you're not at your desk, you're obviously brainstorming somewhere, and it was perfectly acceptable that you could be doing down the pub. There's very strong sort of links again between, alcohol and creativity or perceived creativity. And there's a freedom and an independence associated, I think, with that kind of agency work, that if you weren't at your desk, it was just assumed.
Mm,
And nobody would have scorned at the fact that you would have either been down the pub, or you might have been out with a client, or doing something. As long as you got your job done,
mm,
it wasn't really a question of where are they. I think if you didn't get your job done, people would start to kind of go, what are they doing? Where are they?
mm,
But as long as you were sort of doing what you needed to do, there wasn't really a question as to your method or whereabouts.
mm,
Um, I've got to say, Dave, it wasn't really a pressure thing for me at that stage. I was just enjoying it.
mm,
I was just enjoying it. And of course, now that I look back, I was in a cycle where I was waking up horribly hungover some mornings, and the freedom to be able to go out for lunch and have a drink was obviously the thing that was making me feel better again, because we know how that works, don't we? That, it's the only thing that's going to make you feel better, really. You sort of get up in the morning and you troll off into work and you think, yeah, a bit of a hair of the dog,
yeah.
come lunchtime.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
I've only got 3 or 4 hours to get through till I have another drink kind of thing.
yeah, and I'd be sort of go. I used to have a moped, actually. I used to sort of drive scooter, used to drive into London, and I'd be driving it and thinking, who am I going to pick on as my partner in crime today? Is it going to be so and so or so and so? I won't name names. That wouldn't be very fair, would it? But it would be, who am I going to pick on as my partner in crime? And I was never short of people. I mean, if I swung by someone's desk at 10 o'clock in the morning and said, do you want to go to the pub at lunchtime? Or, should we go out and grab some food at lunchtime? And they'd be like, yeah, absolutely no problem. And we'd probably even expense it, because we'd say, oh, we're having a brainstorm at the same time,
Yeah.
or planning our client meeting at the same time. So there's never any shortage of opportunity at all.
I
So that
imagine
was
that scooter
definitely
got left at work quite a few times.
many times, and
Yeah.
not always where I remembered where it was either.
Mm,
Um, so I would, yeah, no, definitely. I would, so one thing I never did do was drive at home when I'd been drinking, but it was, yeah, I used the tube rather more often than the scooter, and that sometimes the scooter stayed for quite long periods of times, parked up where it was in Soho.
yeah.
Um,
So
but
you
yeah, so
spent the
that
whole career, sorry, you spent the whole career in advertising and I'm going to ask the question that you probably know that's coming. Did that involve advertising alcohol as well, or was it something different?
I advertised a whole load of different things. But yeah, alcohol, it did. And at the time, that was great. When you work in an advertising agency, it's absolutely brilliant if you can actually begin to really blend your sort of interests with the things that you're working on. So I had worked in cars when I was at the beginning of my career, as I said, at Rover. Therefore, when I got to work on a car account, I was like, I love cars.
Yeah,
I love them. I love everything about them. So that that was a joy. Likewise, I'm a real foodie. So whenever I got to work on, an interesting food account, that would have been great. Um, as a heavy drinker at the time, if I got the opportunity to work on an alcohol account, amazing, because I was in that world and therefore I was a consumer,
yeah,
heavy consumer in
yeah,
marketing speak. I was a very heavy consumer. And therefore I clearly wouldn't have had any judgment over whether that was a good or bad account to work on. It was just a very relevant account to me.
yeah,
Um, it was great to go and visit these people and see how they manufactured their spirits and understand, what they did that was different to other manufacturers, such that we could create the campaigns that kind of extolled the virtues of this particular drink. And that's what we did. And I did that without any sense of conscience whatsoever. I truly did. And it's only as I carried on through my life and fell into sort of deep problems with alcohol that I look back now, and it's possibly, well, without doubt, it's the biggest regret of my advertising career that I worked on, peddling alcohol, being very much part of that machine that glamorizes it, romanticizes it, presents it as the answer to, well, the answer is alcohol. What's the question? Do you know what I mean? It's that sort of, and it's, yeah, it upsets me that I did that. Um, but also, I also have to be sort of quietly compassionate to myself and say, I did. That's just part of
oh,
my
the
background. That's
journey.
part of
Yeah,
my journey, and I can't undo that. I was talking to someone the other day, and I said, I've worked on so many different types of accounts. I've helped talk about the virtues of different toilet bleaches, not very sexy, and different cars, rather more sexy. Um, Alcohol regrets progressively, really, definitely sexy at the time, because of where I was in my own relationship with alcohol. But sort of, I see the sinister side of that now.
I'd love
And
to catch up on that later, actually. And
mm,
in a way, I did my own advertising because on my Facebook memories that come up now, nearly every single one's me with a can of a brand or a bottle of a brand, and then
yeah,
glorifying the rewards of it at the time. And now I look at it cringing, thinking, God, who am I? Or who was I? Like a totally different person, but I was who I was at the time and I didn't know any different.
yeah,
Do you know what I mean? So I have to have self-compassion there because I didn't think I was doing anything wrong at the
no,
time, you know.
no, of course.
But so moving on then. So you was living this life in advertising, these liquid lunches and after work and the bottle of
Mhm.
wine on the way home and the, falling asleep in a chair thing, waking up, rinse, repeat. At what stage did you start to question maybe it was becoming a bit of a problem?
Um, I I went off on my first maternity leave. Um, and I remember sort of leaving the advertising agency, literally walking down the steps from the advertising agency on the cusp of my maternity leave, thinking, I need to draw a line. I'm entering a new stage of my life, and I'm very excited. I'm also very terrified, but I have to be responsible. This was very much, I am, oh my God, I'm having a baby, for God's sake. It's
Yeah.
that real sense of this is seismic change, and in my head, at least intellectually, that meant I couldn't sort of take this incredibly booze soaked sort of way of life with me. So I think at the point of on the cusp of motherhood, that for me was I didn't, by the way, think I have to change because I have a problem at this point. I just thought I need to grow up
Yeah.
and be more responsible. I can't I can't be that person and have a baby. I just can't. That's just not right. So that was certainly my sort of resolve. Uh, but it didn't happen. Um, I went off on maternity leave, and within about probably 4 or 5 months of having my first daughter, I was drinking way too much again. Um, so maternity, the sort of the pregnancy period had actually obviously been a sort of a dry period for me. I hadn't drunk when I was pregnant, for reasons which you obviously know, with health wise and stuff. But no, as soon as I'd had my daughter, I found myself drinking very heavily again. I was very unhappy on maternity leave. I've got to say, um, it's not necessarily the sort of popular view. It's not the one that lots of women necessarily sort of maybe even that honest about. But I really really struggled, and I was definitely grieving for my past life.
Mm.
Um, I had been, despite all my drinking, I'd been really good at my job, and I had wrapped it very much into sort of who I was. And yet I didn't think I was a very good mum. I didn't feel very natural. I didn't feel very sort of intuitive. I've always set myself very high bars in terms of, what I've wanted to achieve. And I just didn't feel like I was nailing it. I didn't feel like I was in control. Well, I wasn't in control. No one really is with a young baby, but
No.
this was problematic to me. And so I had sort of left a job which I thought I was very, very good at. And I was now doing a job that I was not yet, in my own mind, good at. I wasn't enjoying it. As I say, I sort of grieved almost for my sort of previous life. I was very, very bored. And I just found myself at this stage definitely letting off steam and using alcohol as a sort of, I don't know, just come the evenings. It was just like, so I would not be drinking during the day because I was responsible for my daughter. But as soon as my husband walked through the door in the evening, um, I would be, looking to eagerly sort of pass the baby over and say, "Oh my God, thank God you're home." And then I would set off and have a drink. And then over time, I'd be thinking, oh, well, he's also kind of on his way home. He will be home within the next hour or so. So I'd start drinking earlier, knowing that that kind of relief was coming. And then before I knew it, I was sort of suggesting to friends in my mother groups around Ealing that there's much better ways to enjoy, coffee and cake. Why don't we just go to the pub and have some lunch?
Yeah.
As sort of substituting alcohol into various parts of that routine as well. Um, I look back and it was definitely, but it crept back in, and then it really took over. It really took over, and my drinking really ramped up when I was on maternity leave. I think that's
Well,
when it really took hold.
I thank you so much for sharing that. Um, and I think there's probably more people than you think that could relate to that as well. And being me as well, we often talk about women and how difficult it is for me. When my son was born, I found
Mhm.
it difficult as well because all of a sudden I had this huge responsibility, and I've been on a jolly up most days going to the
Yeah,
local. Now all of a sudden, life changed, and he was waking up in the middle of the night and stuff, and I struggled big time, and it's almost like my world where it should have been so amazing, and it was, there was a flip side to it of like, it was like I was catapulted out of being a teenager again into a full blown responsible adult, and I couldn't
yeah.
adapt to it. And well, how I
Yeah,
adapted to it was by drinking more.
I know it's the most bizarre thing, isn't it? And I think you're absolutely right. It does not matter whether you're, a bloke or whether you're a woman, parenthood is just one almighty shift. It feels like your foundations it's seismic. It feels like your entire plates of foundation have shifted.
Yeah.
It's very, very disorientating. It's very, very stressful. And if you are already in the very well-worn groove of managing your emotions with alcohol, then obviously parenthood, whether you're the dad or the mum, whether you're in a relationship or whether you're in a single setup, is one almighty tsunami of
Mm,
emotions.
mm,
So if that's already your sort of approach, your tool, if that's the only tool you've got, and through the previous 10, 15 years or whatever, you haven't really therefore had to search for better tools. You've got it, you've got the alcohol. It is, yeah, the emotions come thick and fast. And if you're drinking to manage them, then you can easily find yourself drinking on a daily basis.
yeah.
Easily.
And yours got earlier, didn't it? It's like I wait for the husband to get home. He's on
Yeah.
his way home.
Yeah, yeah,
Then with the mums, and then the lunchtime thing. So a bit like
yeah.
lockdown, wasn't it? Because you know, a lot of people wouldn't even consider drinking at 1 o'clock on a Thursday or Tuesday afternoon, right? But
Mm,
hey, we can now. And before you know it, you're getting cravings at 1 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, and
absolutely.
our body gets used to it and our routine changes as well. We then really start to get into a bloody state with it, don't we?
We do. And I used to, yeah, because I used to sort of, I'd say, well, I know Kira will get home at about 7. Fine. And I'd literally be hanging on until 7, thinking about, having the drink. And then it became text me when you're leaving.
Mm,
Um, so, at sort of 5:45, he'd text me and say, I'm on my way home. And I think, okay, I can have a drink. I know he's coming. I know he's coming. And then, as I say, that would then become, can you leave a little bit earlier tonight, sweetheart?
yeah,
um and then I would just find ways of needling it into earlier into the day. And it was that slippery slope. it was
yeah,
it was the creep, which I didn't really. Did I see it? I don't know if I saw it, Dave. I felt I needed it. It was a survival mechanism, so it wasn't really up for debate. This was how I was getting through. So that was, yeah, I mean, the pressures that young mums and dads are under these days are so great. I have so much compassion. I look back now. I mean, I'm sort of 53 now, so my eldest is now 16. But at a time in life when I knew, every part of my being knew that I should be doing the alternative, that responsible parenthood did not look like this. Um, every part of my being was telling me that, but every instinct within me was pushing me towards the alcohol.
yeah.
And it has this really horrible effect. It has many horrible effects, as we know, but I remember my mum coming up and staying with me one time, and I was in bits, I was in pieces, I was just, useless. Wasn't telling it, didn't tell my mum about my drinking, obviously. But I remember saying to her, I don't know what I'm doing. And I had this book, and I remember it so clearly. It's kind of What to Expect When You're Expecting. That's the book I had when I was pregnant. And then I had a book which was like What to Expect in Baby's First Year. And I was almost treating it like a manual. It's like a sort of maintenance. This is what I have to do. And I remember her saying to me, Anna, put the bloody book down and listen to your instinct. Just listen to your instinct. You know what, you can do this. And I look back now, Dave, and I'm thinking, what instinct? I was drinking so heavily. There's no internal voice, there's no internal compass. You're dulling everything, you're tuning out deliberately. So I think, that maternal instinct and that inner intuition is utterly screwed when you're drinking.
Mm,
Uh, and I remember my mum being very, very exasperated and thinking, that I was barking up the wrong tree, trying to find all the answers to parenthood in sort of podcasts and books, and that, I should have listened to myself more, but I didn't like listening to myself. I was drinking to not listen to all those sorts of
Mm.
emotions. So it's very, very counterproductive at that stage in life, really. But as I say, I genuinely felt I need it for survival.
And yeah, our default coping mechanism, isn't it? When we've been using it for so long in our life, it's an automatic thing we turn to. We know it works.
Yep, absolutely. We know it works, and as I say, I have been sort of I've been drinking for such a long time by then that it was the only thing when we sort of, but one of the biggest deceits about drinking is, first of all, we do believe it's the answer to so many things because it can make us feel better when we're feeling down. It can make us feel more this or less that, or just numb or just not feel at all. But we don't look for other tools.
No.
We seriously, that's the biggest thing I think it robs us of, is that
Yeah.
sort of personal growth opportunity to sort of say, well, this is a bit of a shit tool. So what would a better tool be? Um, I just didn't have them.
Yeah.
I just
And
didn't have
also,
that
there's part
range.
of you that probably didn't want to look because I know for me, it was like a double-edged sword. I knew what he was doing to me, but also there was parts of it that I was okay with, and that overrode the other thing. Do you know what I mean? It was like always, oh, do you know what? I'll manage it tomorrow. I'll do something. It kind of pincered me in a corner of a room every single time. And you
Mm,
either fight your way out of the room or you stay in the room, even though you know it's bad for you, right? And I was, in a way, I was quite content staying in the room because it was easy. Because looking outside of that room was too hard for me at the time because I was already battered. Does that make
yeah.
sense? I
Oh,
was
it makes
like,
total sense.
battered in every area and self-inflicted as well. You know, I
I,
created all this stuff in my world of my anxiety, my lack of motivation, ambition, failing relationships. Like it created the whole thing, but there
mm,
was still that hook that was in me that was like, it works and it's easy because all you got
yeah,
to do is go and get that bottle from the shop and then you don't have to think about it anymore, and that's the bloody nightmare of it, isn't it?
it is. And I totally relate to that, even the room analogy, because I've described it in the past of feeling like I'm in just a dark room and I don't know where the door is, or at least, you might have a sense of where the door is, but you're really scared to open it because what sits beyond that is completely unknown. And it's however uncomfortable and however lonely and however cold it might feel in that dark room, it's easier in a way to say, but I know this room.
Yeah.
I've felt around the edges of this room enough to know that, yes, it's difficult for me to get out, but other people can't come in either. I'm safe. I'm not safe, but I know it. And
There's a
what's it?
comfortability about it, so maybe
There
safe.
is,
There's an element of safety when you're in that moment, right? But there's the
yeah, it's
comfortability
the
of
comfort.
like, do you know what? I haven't got it in me to change it. So I've been there, honestly, and I'm sure the listeners are either been there or are there. But what moment did you open the door? Did you feel the walls and then felt the handle and go, do you know what? This time I need to open the door.
Uh, I I have basically I haven't had a drink in the last nearly 4 years, and I reckon it was about a year before that. So when I was about 48. So basically, I drank all the way through my 30s, having children. Um, all the way through my 40s, my children were still young, and I was in the sort of the routine and the struggles that I've just talked about. And it was in my late 40s that I never had a rock bottom of, the kind of dramatic and sort of tragic circumstances, but I don't think I could have personally sunk any lower than I was emotionally. So no big drama. but just the most unhappy and exhausting of existences, really. Still working, still functioning, rising through the ranks at work, putting on a brave face, leading teams, doing well, but literally emotional carnage and disaster waiting to happen. And I remember, this might not sound sort of hugely profound to a lot of people, but I do remember one day I was cooking in the kitchen and I was always drinking when I was cooking. That was my kind of like, and I would therefore orchestrate long Sunday cooking sessions and stuff like that. So I could be drinking away. And I remember plans changed and the kids didn't go out. And in the end, I think, Kieran said to me, oh, we'd agreed that there's an agreement made that we were going to play a family game. And I was absolutely trolleyed. Um, and I remember my youngest saying to my dad, saying to my husband, Daddy, why is mummy behaving so funny? And he took me aside. He was furious. I mean, I was in a right old mess. And I remember thinking to myself that just that sort of the confronted by the children's confusion and realizing what I looked like to them and just actually how drunk I was on that particular occasion, it made me think I've got to do something about this. And I started, sort of feeling my way out of the room, as it were. So cracked the door open and started to sort of research the various options because I didn't want to go to AA. I really, my own personal reasons, wonderful organization, by the way, but for my own personal reasons, I just had such strong resistance to it. And I had to find a sort of an approach that worked for me and something which I believed I could do. I think that was the thing. I needed agency. I needed belief that I could do it. And that's really where it all started for me, late 40s and probably that Sunday afternoon. I also did that well-known exercise now where you sort of play your life forward. And, cracks were beginning to show in my marriage because my husband and I were beginning to have more fractious issues over drinking. I was drinking secretively. He knew it. I thought I was getting away with it. Clearly, you know, don't we all? Uh, he could tell when I had been drinking. I was therefore lying, never good. Um, and I knew that if I played my life forward in, the trajectory was going to have me in a very lonely place, really. Difficult to sort of say what else might have ensued, but I would certainly have probably buggered up most of the relationships that I had
Yeah.
that, fuel me in life. Yeah, and there's no doubt that the amount that I was drinking and stuff would have had a health toll as well. So
And what
yeah,
did the
that was
first few months look like then in your sobriety?
um I had this sort of sense that I was going to moderate, and then I realized quite quickly that that was incredibly hard and that I just had to sort of stop. So it was just uh really doubled down efforts on not drinking and reminding myself of why I didn't want to drink, daily commitments, not today. I did end up pursuing a sort of an approach to alcohol control, which was sort of made popular by This Naked Mind. So I took a month off. I treated it as an experiment. I know this is something that we talk about quite a lot as being really important. I tried to relieve all the pressure of never, ever, ever again, and just something about that notion of just wanting to get more curious and understand my relationship
Mm.
because I'm not, I'm reasonably smart. uh I wanted to understand where it had all come from, and I have always been curious as to, we started off this conversation, didn't we, about childhood and stuff. I've been curious about tracking back and understanding where it's all, how life ended up the way it did. So I started to do a lot of work and just really unpick everything. you've got to create that space though, haven't you, of not being judgmental about it.
Mm.
I had blips. I didn't stop and suddenly never drink again. I probably had maybe 3 or 4 days where I didn't drink, and then I had a drink, and then I had to be really, really strong not to beat myself up and spiral, to get back up and start again. 4 or 5 days and then a drink, and the next time was maybe 7 or 8 days
Yeah.
and then a drink, and eventually it was becoming weeks, and the weeks became the months, and I had created enough, I suppose, confidence, and enough proof points to myself that I could do this, that, the period of time became longer without a drink, and the blips became fewer and fewer, and then I just stopped.
Amazing. And this is why I believe that moderation is virtually impossible when your drinking becomes a problem, right? Because I was
Yeah,
certainly not one that could have a pint lunchtime and then go back and have a cup of tea. That one pint was the starting gun going off. It's like, right, you can get drunk now, you know.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it takes up too much bandwidth. But half the battle is, I think, is accepting that it is over. So you want to keep going back into the room that you felt so comfortable in. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
So we don't
yeah.
shut the door and bolt it. We leave it ajar. And that's what moderation is, isn't it? It's like,
It is, and I I share your perspective. I think moderation is incredibly hard. Um, for as long, I mean, one of the caveats that I put on it, I think moderation is very, very hard for as long as you are ever giving alcohol an emotional role to play. I mean, if alcohol is relevant to you, i.e., you see its relevance, it can make a stress situation less stressed, or a sad situation more happy, or a boring situation more interesting. If you're using it to affect any of those kind of emotional changes, then it has a role, it is relevant, and you will always want more of it.
mm,
If you can have a detachment such that, that sort of famous take it or leave it, it is
mm.
because literally you're not giving it any of those, sort of emotional roles.
No, I like that.
Um,
That's a very good way of putting it, actually.
because I think the take it or leave it is because it's irrelevant. It's
Yeah,
irrelevant to you whether you have a
yeah.
drink or not, and therefore, if the, why would you? But it's not irrelevant if you've
No,
got
I love
if
that
you're giving
because
it a job.
I've often said about gambling, it doesn't mean anything to me. There's no emotional attachment to gambling,
No,
right? So if I ever did, which I don't, but so I had a bet on the Epsom Derby and I won 100 quid, it wouldn't make me think, oh God, that's made me so good. I'm going to gamble more. There's nothing there. It'd be a
yeah,
touch, but it wouldn't make me want to gamble that on something else. So I love that
yeah, and
perspective.
but that's a really interesting. It's a similar analogy, isn't it? If a friend said to you, "Oh, let's go to the casino,"
I'd
you'd be
hate it.
like, "Oh, that's yeah." You probably hate it, but I think there'd be a sense of, "Well, you could go because it's what a group of friends are doing," but you have no attachment to it
No.
whatsoever.
No.
And I think, if you're if you're if alcohol is irrelevant to you in the same way as gambling is irrelevant to you, if alcohol is irrelevant to you, friends can say to you, let's go to the pub, without you seeing it as an opportunity to address any issues that you might have going on subconsciously, any
Mm,
emotions, you can just go to the pub because it's what your friends are doing.
mm,
But it's that is hard if you've come off the back of using it as a tool for so long.
mm.
Because it's, you can sort of slip quite quickly back into that.
Yeah.
um so yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of that first few months really exploring how else I could therefore, I use this term about making alcohol irrelevant, making it literally insignificant, because I needed to build better tools. I'm quite a logical person. If it had been my only tool and it was not serving me, I needed better tools.
Mm.
I needed to find other ways of relaxing, other things that could make me happy, other ways of sort of filling my time or feeling less lonely, or whatever it might be. I just had to say, well, what are my needs? where's my hankering coming from, and how best can I kind of fulfill them?
Mm.
And then the rest becomes, in a way, evidence based. That, you're doing it. You're going through life day by day, week by week. You're not drinking, and you begin to feel better, and you begin to experience things that you've always associated with a drink, and realize that they too can be fun. Um, and that there's a whole world out there that you'd actually close down as an option to even walk into, because of, your sole focus in the past had been drinking. So things open up, and then that becomes exciting. And so it's a progressive thing. It certainly was for me. But it certainly started off with having to sort of unpick the reasons why I was drinking in the first place, and what I was asking it to do for me, and question really, whether it was working. Clearly it wasn't. Was it
Mm.
serving me? No.
I know. Look, Anna, I like
Yes.
to keep this within an hour,
Yep.
and I believe we could talk forever, but I just want to go on to talk about your amazing podcast, The Big
Mm.
Drink Rethink. So I brought my podcast out, it's got to be 4 years ago now, and there weren't many like it that were life stories and people really related to it, and they still do, and they love them. But
Yeah,
yours
it's
is
great.
slightly different, and yours comes more from the thinking perspective. And I listened to a couple of episodes of yours, and I loved it. I loved the way you think and speak, and you've had some great guests on, including my old mate, Professor David Nutt, who I
Hmm.
love. And in your interview, he was so relaxed. It was such a lovely interview to listen to. Um, but I just want to touch before we go, and we were
Hmm.
going to have the conversation about it, but I think we'll have to cover it another time, or I can direct them over to your episode of where you were in the advertising industry for so long, and you talked about it on your own on one of your episodes
Mm.
about your thoughts about the advertising in the alcohol industry. And do you want to briefly just touch on that before we go?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, so yeah, I normally have guests on, and we sort of talk about different themes, but I thought when it comes to the sort of the world of advertising, I know it so well that I would just go solo and talk about it. Um, I suppose it's a bit of a sort of ugly look at the way the advertising world does. Literally, we say, don't we, in principle, that the marketing of advertising conditions us. And it does. It
Mm,
does. And we're not impervious to it. However much we think we might be, we are literally not impervious to it. So, yeah, it was a conversation about the deliberate attempts of drinks companies, alcohol drinks companies, to attach themselves to the emotional needs of drinkers.
mm,
So, for example, in my situation as a young mum on maternity leave, there would have been somebody sat in an advertising agency somewhere in the UK saying, how do we make sure that when this young mum is feeling her moment of need, her most, unconfident, in need of most reassurance, a get together with friends, how do we make sure that that young mum reaches for our brand?
mm,
What emotional need do we attach it to? And this is where I go back and I say, my big regret is working on such brands, is because I did that job. I would have looked at how do we as a drinks company encourage younger people into the brand, because we've got to feed it from that end. Obviously an older audience ends up dying and not being a consumer anymore. How do we feed it? How do we ensure the longevity of this brand? And there's very, very, very strategic conversations that go on, very, I would say, sinister conversations that go on around how we feed the funnel, bring the next wave of drinkers into any given brand, what need we tell them we are fulfilling, and how to increase both the frequency and the volume of consumption. And if anyone is in ever doubt ever as to the deliberate design of advertising to do that, then yeah, I suggest you listen to that episode. It's a bit eye-opening, I think. Or certainly that was the reason I did it. But yeah,
It's
yeah,
it's
it's it
actually spine chilling you know, when you say about, you know, how they aim at the younger generation to basically turn them into bloody addicts, you know, for
Yeah, I
money.
mean, absolutely. So there's obviously very clear rules about being advertised alcohol to people under a certain age, but the drinks companies, they can get around that. They can sponsor festivals. You know, they can put promotions in places which teenagers just can't avoid seeing them. So it's even the ambient stuff, even if you're not allowed to go directly and advertise a particular side of the ambient way that they can sort of put it in front of a teen audience
Mm,
is very, very expansive. And we would have long conversations with drinks companies about the fact that, you know, as a younger consumer, teenagers prefer more sugary, sort of sweeter palate. So NPD, you know, new product development should definitely focus on appealing to the younger teen talent, sorry,
right.
palate, and you know, and how do we develop the profile of drinks to bring them through as their palate changes age 15, 16, 17, and
Yeah.
then into young adult. And it's just like, wow, man. It's, you know,
Yeah.
it is.
So like
It's
the alka pops and stuff like that. And
yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that's a bit sort of spine chilling, but I mean, you can see obviously it goes on, and you can, they're all commercial businesses here, so we can see why they're doing it. But the packaging as well, the single serve, the idea that these days, you know, you can go into a supermarket and you can buy single serve cans of drink, just glasses that you rip the top off,
mm,
or cans, and they're not far away from the baby food aisle.
yeah,
Do you know what I mean? Because you
yeah,
think, yes, yes, young mum,
yeah,
why wouldn't you just pop one of these little handy tins
in your handbag.
into your handbag if you're going to go on that walk through the
Yeah,
park, you know? And it's just a very sort of deliberate world of putting, you know, making a brand appeal, assigning it a role to play in someone's life, putting it in front of them at a point of need, wrapping it up in very aspirational values, and then simply saying to people, oh, but make sure you drink responsibly.
yeah.
You know, it's all your fault
All
if you
your
fall
fault.
foul of
Yeah,
this. It's all your
yeah,
fault if you fall foul of this thing, which we have really spent a lot of money
yeah,
on ensuring that you fall foul of. But
yeah.
it's your
To earn a
fault.
lot of money
Yeah,
off the back of
yeah,
you. Yeah, it's disgusting. You know, it makes my blood boil. But yeah,
yeah,
so that's the Big Drink Rethink.
yeah.
Fantastic podcast. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you so much for sharing your story. It's been really amazing. Thank you. And well done. Congratulations on your sobriety as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me on. And it has been every much as enjoyable as I thought it would be. It's lovely to see you. Thank you.
We'll meet one day.
We will. We will.
Thanks, Hannah.
Yeah, take care, Dave. Thanks.